My son backed his truck out of the driveway at highway speed and drove it straight through the kitchen wall I'd framed with these hands 23 years ago, 3 months before he was even born. He didn't miss the wall. He didn't lose control. He chose that spot with the same precision he'd learned watching me work job sites his whole life. And he did it while I was standing 7 feet away, watching his hands on the wheel, watching him decide to destroy everything instead of telling me the truth. The wall is fixed now. The insurance paid. The criminal charges are done. But there's something about this story that I've had to sit with, alone, for months. So I'm going to tell you what happened, because I think it's important, and I think you're going to recognize yourself somewhere in it, whether you're the parent or the kid or the person standing in the kitchen when everything broke. My name is Marcus Delacroix. I'm 54 years old. I run a restoration company here in Houston called Delacroix Contracting. Been in the business for 30 years, which means I've learned something most people never think about. A foundation doesn't collapse overnight. It fails because you ignore a small crack for years, loading weight onto a fracture you already know is there, telling yourself it'll hold one more season, just one more year. I've got 4 people on my crew, 2 trucks, and my family name on the company check. My wife is Elena. We've been together 26 years. We were both 28 when we married in my parents' backyard in Montrose, just immediate family, a barbecue, the kind of wedding that costs almost nothing because we were already poor and just didn't know it yet. Elena got pregnant on our honeymoon. Not planned. We found out on the drive back to Houston from Galveston. I remember her sitting in the passenger seat reading the test result, and instead of saying anything, she just laughed. That kind of laugh that sounds like acceptance. So our son, Antoine, was born about 8 months after that. I'm 54. Antoine just turned 24. Do the math. I was 30 when he was born. He spent his entire life growing up on job sites with me, learning how restoration works before he learned how to read. He knew the difference between load-bearing and decorative studs before he understood why adults go to work. The house matters to this story. We bought it in 1998 on Lockhart Street, south of Herman Park, a 1950s ranch house with a roof that was actively falling in, and a kitchen that opened straight onto the driveway through a wide bay window. I spent 6 weeks that summer, framing that window out while Elena was carrying Antoine. The Houston heat in July is the kind of heat that doesn't exist in stories. It's suffocating, wet, the kind that makes you forget how to think. I remember sweat pouring down my face while I cut the framing, thinking about the baby coming, thinking about money, thinking about whether I was ready. That window was the last thing I finished before Antoine arrived. For 24 years, it looked out onto the exact spot where my son would later aim a Ford F-150. But Antoine wasn't always the kind of kid who would do something like that. I need you to understand this before I keep going, because if I make him sound evil from the start, I'm lying to you, and none of this makes sense unless you know he wasn't. 2 summers ago, when he was 22, I was working on a brutal kitchen renovation in a historic home in the Heights. Old house, plumbing from the 60s that had never been replaced. I got down under the sink to deal with a corrosion issue that had completely seized the main shutoff valve. 45 minutes down there in the dark, wrist twisted, sweat in my eyes, absolutely nothing working. My whole body was vibrating with frustration. I heard Antoine come in. He was working with me that summer between college semesters, and he didn't say anything. He just knelt down next to me in the dark, put his own work headlamp on, and aimed it exactly where I needed to see. He held that light steady. Didn't ask, didn't joke, just held the light. When the valve finally broke loose, when I finally felt that metal give way after 45 minutes of fighting it, he said one thing: "Good. Now let's get the new one in before your shoulders lock up." And he handed me the wrench before I even opened my mouth to ask. He'd seen me reach for it 100 times. He knew what I needed. That's the Antoine I need you to picture. Quiet, useful, present, paying attention to things nobody else paid attention to. That kid existed. That version of him is real. What happened to him didn't erase him. It just got buried under something else. The way drywall mud covers a crack that nobody bothered to sand first. The layering, best I can figure now, started about 7 months before the night I'm telling you about. Antoine had done a 1.5 years at San Jacinto College taking business classes. Said he wanted to maybe take over the estimating side of my company eventually. Then out of nowhere, he dropped 2 classes. Didn't talk to me about it first. I just found out from Elena when she asked him where he was during class time. He said he wasn't interested anymore. Then he withdrew from the entire semester. And he started spending most nights with people I'd never met. New group. Met online through something he called an investment opportunity. Elena noticed before I did. She's always sharper about people than I'll ever be. She said, "Marcus, he's not sleeping. I can hear him on his phone at 3 in the morning. Something's wrong." And I told her, "He's 24. He's got to figure some things out." I still regret that response more than almost anything else in this story. There's this thing that happens when your kid becomes an adult. You stop being responsible for them, and somehow that feels like permission to stop paying attention to them. It's not permission. It's just laziness wearing the mask of respect. 3 months before the night I'm telling you about, Antoine asked me for $16,000, just like that. Said he wanted to invest with a guy named Marcus Torres. Not his real name. I know now in something that was ground floor and absolutely guaranteed. Those words should have been alarms. They were alarm bells, wrapped in the language of people who know how to lie to men like me. In construction, if the story doesn't hold up under 5 basic questions, you don't sign off on the job. You tell the client you need more information. I told Antoine no, not because I didn't trust him with money, because I didn't trust the version of the story he was feeding me. There was information missing. There was desperation under the confidence. And desperate people lie. He got quiet after that. Started coming home later. Started looking away when Elena tried to talk to him at dinner. Started making excuses about why he wasn't in his room, why he wasn't where he said he'd be. I found out much later that Marcus Torres wasn't an investment partner. Marcus Torres was one of 2 men Antoine owed money to. Big money. Gambling money. And the investment was never anything but Antoine trying to solve a problem by throwing more money at it. Money he didn't have. Money he was borrowing from people who had already stopped being patient with him. Here's how I actually found out what was underneath all of it. And it wasn't a lucky break. It was my business partner doing his job. Jackson Mills has run the books for Delacroix Contracting for 11 years, since it was just me and 1 truck and a dream that might not work out. 5 weeks before the crash, Jackson came into my office on a Tuesday morning with his laptop open and said, "Marcus, we're short again. $280. Just small enough that you wouldn't catch it if you weren't looking." But it had happened 6 times over the last 8 weeks. Always right after Antoine had been in to grab supplies. Always a different amount. Jackson wasn't accusing anybody. He was just doing what a good accountant does, flagging a pattern before it becomes a problem. I told him I'd handle it quietly and that I meant it. But I didn't confront Antoine right away. I did what I do on a job when I find rot behind a wall I didn't expect. I opened it up further before I decided what to cut out. I talked to 2 of my crew members who'd worked alongside Antoine that summer. Casual conversations over coffee, nothing that felt like interrogation. One of them, a young guy named Deshaun, mentioned carefully, like he didn't want to be the one saying it, that he'd seen Antoine's truck outside a certain building on Navigation Boulevard more nights than not. A building above a tattoo shop. Late nights, sometimes 3 in the morning. That same week, our house phone rang on a Thursday evening. A number I didn't recognize. A man's voice asking politely for Antoine Delacroix, regarding an outstanding balance with a private lending organization. I told him he had the wrong number and hung up. My hands were shaking, because I knew exactly what kind of organization he meant, and I knew exactly whose hands Antoine had reached into. I didn't sleep that night. Elena found me at 2 in the morning at our kitchen table, with a legal pad doing the kind of mathematics I do when a job is about to go wildly over budget. Except this time I wasn't calculating lumber costs. I was writing down everything Antoine owed, everyone he owed it to, and the timeline of how he'd gotten there. The numbers came to close to $18,000 spread across 2 main creditors plus a smaller private loan from somewhere I couldn't trace. $18,000 that I absolutely had the ability to write a check for right then. $18,000 that I absolutely would not. 2 nights before the crash, I was in the backyard pretending to work on the patio lighting when I heard Antoine's voice through the kitchen window. He was on his phone, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months. Loose and easy, and completely at peace. He was telling somebody, "Nah, don't worry about it. My old man's going to handle this. He always does. I'll have it by the weekend. Guaranteed. The same word he'd used 3 months earlier when he asked for the 16 grand. Guaranteed. Like it was a law of the universe. Like his father's wallet was a force of nature he'd figured out how to control. Guaranteed. The way he'd guaranteed lots of things were going to work out in that card room. He genuinely believed he had read me. He thought I was a door he just hadn't leaned on hard enough. That's the moment I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, disappointment. The kind of disappointment that comes from realizing your child thinks you're stupid enough to be manipulated by someone you taught him how to think. Saturday night, Elena and I were cleaning up after dinner when Antoine's truck pulled into the driveway too fast, gravel spinning under the tires. He came in through the side door already talking, already loud, his voice carrying that frantic edge that means desperation is finally catching up to pretense. He said, "I need the money. I need 18,000 by Monday morning or things are going to get really bad. Like, actually bad. Dad, you don't understand who these guys are." And I stood there listening to him, and I felt Elena's hand reach over and grip my arm. She knew what was coming. I said, "Then we call the police tonight, Antoine." He looked at me like I'd said something in another language. I said, "That's what you do when people threaten you. You call the police. You don't hand them money to make the threat go away. That just proves to them that threats work." He said, "You don't get it. I get plenty. I get that you've been lying to your mother's face for months. I get that money's been disappearing from my business because you've been taking it. I get that you've been gambling with money you don't have in a building the police would love to know about. What I don't get is why you think the answer is for me to hand you a check." He said, "You've got that money in the business account." "I've seen the books," I said. "My business account is none of your business. And even if I had cash sitting on this counter, I wouldn't hand it to you tonight. Not like this. Not while you're standing in my kitchen threatening me with imaginary deadlines." He said, "So you're just going to let me get hurt?" I said, "No. I'm offering you help. Real help. We call the police right now. We find you counseling for the gambling. We deal with this in daylight with people who know how to handle people who make threats. That's what I'm offering," Antoine said. "That's offering me nothing. That's offering me getting my legs broken so you can feel like you taught me some kind of lesson." And I said something I've thought about every day since. I said, "I'm offering you the truth, which is more than you've given me in 8 months." He stood there in the kitchen doorway for what felt like a very long time. And honestly, I thought I saw something crack open in his face. I thought it landed. I thought he was going to nod and say okay, and let his shoulders drop and admit that he was in over his head. I thought I was about to watch my son tell the truth. Then he turned around, slammed out the side door. I heard the truck start. I thought he was leaving to cool off. I thought we'd talk in the morning when his head was clearer. I was wrong. And I want to be honest with you about what came next, because I've had to replay it enough times for the police report and the insurance adjuster that I've started to think of it in slow motion, even though it happened in maybe 4 seconds total. He backed out fast, cut the wheel hard, and instead of turning onto the street to leave, he gunned the engine and aimed the truck straight back across our yard toward the kitchen bay window. The one I'd framed myself 24 years ago while Elena was pregnant with him. The same window that had looked out onto his childhood, his birthday parties, his first day of middle school, all of it. He drove straight at it. The bumper came through first. Then the whole front end. Glass exploded. Drywall dust filled the air like fog. The cabinet where Elena kept her good dishes that her mother had given her crushed flat like it was made of paper. The truck stopped maybe 5 or 6 feet from where Elena and I had been standing just a minute before. The engine was still running. Antoine was sitting behind the wheel, and he was staring straight ahead like even he couldn't believe what his own hands had just done. No one moved. The dust was still settling. I could hear the engine ticking as it cooled. And I want to be honest with you about what I did in that moment, because this is where the story gets hard to tell. I didn't run at the truck screaming. I didn't pull him out and shake him. I didn't cry or yell or do any of the things that my body wanted to do. Because I've spent 30 years in construction learning that when something's broken badly, the worst possible thing you can do is start swinging at it in anger. You make it worse. You compound the damage. You turn a repairable fracture into a total loss. So I walked over to the truck. I reached in through the shattered window, and I turned the key off. Then I looked at Antoine and I said, Get out and sit on the porch steps. He got out like he was moving through water. He sat down. And I called 911. The police came. An officer named Ramirez who was patient and careful. And yes, I pressed charges: reckless driving, criminal mischief, destruction of property. The insurance adjuster, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, came out 2 days later and walked the damage with me. The final estimate came to just over $38,000 once you factored in structural damage, the total replacement of the window frame, the cabinetry, the tile work, everything. $38,000. Antoine spent that night in a holding cell. And I want to be honest with you, part of me wanted to bail him out before sunrise. Part of me wanted to do what I've always done, which is solve the problem with a phone call and a check and make it go away. Part of me was screaming that I was being cruel, that a good father would rescue his son immediately, that I was teaching him a lesson he'd never forget, and not in the way I intended. Jenna and I sat in my truck outside the jail at 6 in the morning. The sun was just coming up over the buildings. Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "If we bail him out right now, we're just replacing the drywall and painting over it. We're pretending the wall is fixed when the frame underneath is still broken, and it's going to fail again in the exact same spot. But this time, it might be us standing in front of it." She was right. I've repaired enough walls in my life to know that patching over rot doesn't fix anything. It just delays the collapse. It just makes it worse when it finally comes. So we didn't bail him out. We went home. I stood in that destroyed kitchen and looked at where the truck had come through, and I made the decision that was going to cost me more than money. I decided to let my son face what he'd done. The arraignment was 3 weeks later, a municipal courthouse that smelled like floor wax and old carpet. I sat in the back with Elena's hand in mine and didn't say a word because for once this wasn't something I could fix. The plea deal came a month after that. Restitution spread over 2 years. Mandatory gambling counseling every week. 18 months of probation. A no-contact order with the 2 men he'd owed money to. 100 hours of community service. It was thorough. It was fair. And it meant Antoine was going to have to live with this decision for a long time. I didn't write a check to cover his debts either. I let him face the payment plan, the court dates, the meetings, all of it. Elena asked me once, quietly, if that made me a hard man. I told her I didn't think so. I thought it made me a man who'd finally stopped confusing, saving somebody with helping them. There's a difference. And for most of Antoine's life, I'd been too scared to know the difference. What I did do was drive him to his first gambling counseling session myself. A low brick building near the courthouse with a waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. I didn't go in with him. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 55 minutes while he was inside, engine off, just thinking about all the times I'd bailed him out, all the times my wallet had been his solution, all the times I'd confused my ability to solve a problem with my responsibility to let him solve it himself. When he came out, he didn't say much. Just got in and stared out the window the whole drive home. I told him I'd drive him every Tuesday for as long as he needed. I meant it, and I have. Every single Tuesday for the last 4 months, rain or shine, I drive to that building and I wait. Some weeks he comes out looking a little lighter. Some weeks he looks heavier. Most weeks he just looks like he's doing the work. That's all I'm asking for now, the work. Not the outcome, not the promise that he'll be fine, just the work. It's been 4 months since he drove that truck through the kitchen. The kitchen is almost completely rebuilt. I did the framing myself on weekends alone, which tells you something about where things stand between us. We talk now, but it's careful. The kind of careful you use with something that's been broken and badly glued back together, before you really know if the repair is going to hold. I don't know yet if it will. Some nights I believe it will. Other nights I catch myself staring at the new drywall, looking for cracks that aren't actually there. Last week Antoine came by on a Sunday afternoon. He stood in the kitchen doorway again, the exact same spot where he'd lost his mind, and asked if he could help me finish trimming out the new window. I handed him the miter saw without a word, the same way he'd handed me a wrench 7 summers ago when I was struggling under a sink. We worked for maybe 2 hours, didn't talk much. Jenna watched from the hallway for a while, then quietly went back to whatever she was doing, letting us have this moment without an audience. We didn't need one. When we finished the last cut, Antoine ran his hand along the trim and checked the seam the way I taught him, the way he'd watched me do 1,000 times. And he said one thing: "It's straight. Not sorry. Not a speech. Not some moment I could package up and make sense of. Just an honest read on honest work." He gathered his tools and drove off in a used Honda Civic he bought with his lumberyard paychecks. The truck that he'd crashed through the kitchen was declared a total loss and hauled off to the insurance salvage yard the week after the accident. Neither of us has ever looked for it at that lot. I stood in that kitchen alone for a long time after he left, hand on the seam of the new trim, thumb checking the work. And I realized something. I've spent 30 years fixing broken things. Fixing walls, fixing houses, fixing problems. But I couldn't fix this. And the moment I stopped trying to fix it, it started to actually heal. Not heal back to what it was. We're never going back to that. We're building something new now. Something slower. Something that has to be earned every single Tuesday when I pick him up from counseling. Something that doesn't come from money or problem solving or having the right answer. Something that just comes from showing up, from standing next to him, from doing honest work side by side, from understanding that some walls you don't finish with a grand gesture and a big conversation. You finish them one true cut at a time. If you've ever stood in a room where your child stopped listening to your words and started testing your boundaries instead, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever felt that moment when love and discipline split apart and you had to choose which one to follow, you know the weight of that choice. If you've ever wanted to rescue someone so badly that you had to physically stop yourself from reaching out, this story is for you. Because what I learned is this: the times we most want to save people are exactly the times we most need to let them save themselves. The hardest thing I've ever done isn't construction. It's learning to love someone by not fixing them. It's learning to be present for someone's pain without trying to make it disappear. It's learning that my job as a father changed the day Antoine turned 18 and I didn't get the memo. So here's what I want to ask you. In the comments, tell me 1, 2, or 3. 1, if you think I made the right call not bailing him out. 2, if you think I was too harsh. 3, if you've been on one side of this story or the other. I really do want to know. Tell me where you're watching from right now and what time it is where you are. And if you've ever had a moment where you had to choose between loving someone and saving them, and they turned out to be different things, I want to hear about it. There's something powerful about knowing you're not alone in those kinds of choices. Something that makes it easier to breathe. If you made it this far, please subscribe. There are more stories coming. Stories about people learning things the hard way. Stories about walls and cracks and the difference between patching something and actually fixing it. Stories about fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and all the ways we try to save people when what we should really be doing is teaching them to save themselves. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss them. Because stories like this one, they matter. And you deserve to know that you're not the only person standing in your kitchen at 2 in the morning doing the math, trying to figure out if you're being a good parent or a cruel one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.